Welcome to today's deep dive. We are jumping straight into a highly analytical mission today. We're operating off a fascinating Japanese psychological text.
Right.
And our goal here is to clinically deconstruct a habit that, well, I mean, almost all of us have.
Yeah.
Fake smiling, specifically fake smiling out of fear or, a desire to people pleaser. So we're going to look at its origins as a childhood survival strategy, how it completely backfires in adulthood, and most importantly, how this text reframes being intentionally unsociable, not as a personality flaw, but as as a critical tool for emotional self-preservation.
Yeah, exactly. The source material provides a really rigorous behavioral framework for this. We are moving past the colloquial idea of just being nice,
Right.
and we're examining the actual psychological mechanics of emotional regulation, boundary setting, and why we project the specific signals we do in high-stress environments.
So to start us off, think about the last time someone was subtly insulting you or, dominating a conversation in a way that made you deeply uncomfortable. Chances are your immediate physical reaction wasn't to frown or to yell. You probably smiled at them.
You definitely smile.
Yes. And that is where the deep dive begins.
Yeah.
Because when we look at physical defense mechanisms in nature, there is a distinct practical logic. Like a turtle retreats into its shell.
Yeah.
A porcupine raises its quills. The defense physically repels the threat. The boundary is clear.
Because a physical threat requires a physical barrier.
Exactly.
The mechanism matches the goal, which is self-preservation.
Yeah.
But social threats, well, they operate on an entirely different economy. When we examine human behavioral psychology, specifically how we navigate toxic or threatening social dynamics, that logic completely inverts.
It totally flips.
It does. The text we're analyzing today argues that our chosen psychological armor, the fake smile, is actively broadcasting our vulnerabilities to the exact wrong people.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the primary driver behind this chronic fake smiling is a profound, almost paralyzing fear of being disliked. We're interacting with someone we genuinely dislike, someone whose presence triggers our stress response, and yet our biological reflex is to stretch our facial muscles into a smile.
Right.
On a subconscious level, we're operating under the assumption that this performance will protect the relationship. We think we are neutralizing the threat.
Right. The internal logic is basically, if I am agreeable, if I am visibly pleasant and non-threatening, you have no reason to attack me.
Yeah.
I am neutralizing myself to keep you calm. But the text highlights what it terms the reversal effect.
The reversal effect, yeah.
In reality, this behavior does not signal safety or mutual respect to a toxic person. To an individual who's looking to dominate or manipulate, it signals extreme vulnerability.
Okay, let's really break down this reversal effect because it's essentially the crux of the whole behavioral loop. When you use a fake smile to smooth over a toxic interaction, the other person doesn't process that and think, what a polite, accommodating person. I should treat them with respect.
No, not at all.
Right. Subconsciously, they interpret that forced smile as permission. They recognize that you are prioritizing their comfort over your own boundaries.
Exactly.
So they look down on you. They realize you can be easily controlled or conveniently used. It's like an autoimmune response in our social behavior.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's a defense mechanism that misidentifies the threat and ends up attacking our own social standing.
The weapon of defense becomes the very blade that harms the user. We're deploying a shield that essentially has a target painted on the inside.
Right.
And tracing this specific maladaptive reflex back to its developmental roots explains why we are programmed with this autoimmune response in the first place. The source material points directly to our childhood environments and heavily relies on the developmental psychology concept of the secure base.
The absolute ally in a child's life.
Exactly. A secure base is typically a primary caregiver who provides unconditional, stable support. So children who possess this secure base, they grow up with a solid emotional foundation. Because they had that absolute ally, they inherently internalize that even if someone in the wider world rejects them or dislikes them, their foundational safety isn't threatened.
Right.
Their survival does not depend on universal approval. Therefore, they don't develop a systemic physiological fear of being disliked.
And the text then contrasts this with children who grew up without that base, particularly those with hostile or critically emotionally unstable parents.
Yes.
If the person who is supposed to be your secure base is volatile, like if their mood dictates the safety of the entire house, you don't have a foundation, you have a minefield.
Right. And surviving a minefield requires you to become an expert at managing the explosives. A child in that environment possesses zero physical power and zero financial power.
Yeah.
Their only tool for survival is the emotional regulation of the adult. For them, a fake smile isn't about being polite or observing social etiquette. It is a literal survival strategy. They learn to deploy a smile, to act cheerful, to perform constantly, to placate the adult and navigate those unpredictable moods. They are diffusing a bomb with a smile.
It's an incredibly effective strategy when you are a child physically trapped in that specific environment. It achieves the goal, it keeps you safe in that moment.
Right.
The tragedy is that this neurological wiring doesn't just spontaneously update when you become an adult, it carries over. Suddenly you're 35 years old, you're sitting in a boardroom, a colleague is being subtly hostile to you, and your brain reverts to that childhood survival strategy. You start fake smiling.
You are fighting a modern war with outdated tactics.
Hmm.
The environment has changed, your power dynamic has changed, but the behavioral reflex remains identical.
The text makes a really vital point here for anyone analyzing their own behavior. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, the requirement is objective observation, not self-blame. You cannot shame yourself for utilizing a survival mechanism that successfully kept you safe when you were small and vulnerable.
No, absolutely not.
The goal of this analysis is simply to observe the mechanism playing out in adult environments where it's no longer serving you and is, in fact, actively inviting exploitation.
Recognizing the malfunction is the first step, but we need a functional replacement. So if the fake smile is an obsolete and actively harmful defense, what do we replace it with?
Right.
The source makes a clinical case for the state of being unsociable. However, applying this requires a strict, technical distinction between being unsociable and simply being in a bad mood.
And I'm glad we are defining this clearly because on the surface they look similar. A person in a bad mood and an unsociable person both lack a smile, but the underlying psychological machinery is completely different.
Very different.
The source material utilizes Japanese concepts to delineate this, which is helpful because English often conflates the two. First, we have the bad mood, or fukigen.
Fukigen.
Right. This is not a passive internal state. This is a highly active outward projection of negative emotion.
Fukigen is essentially a form of emotional manipulation. The text is very clear on the behavioral markers. When someone is in a bad mood, they want you to know it.
Oh, yeah.
They are intentionally muttering complaints under their breath. They are deliberately clearing their throat, tossing papers onto a desk, or letting out heavy performative sighs.
They are broadcasting.
The broadcasting is the entire point. The goal of the bad mood is to force the people in the surrounding environment to read the room, to absorb that negative energy, and to actively cater to the broadcaster to fix it.
Wow.
It is an aggressive outward demand for emotional labor from others. The person is using their negative mood to control the space.
So what does this all mean when we contrast that with being unsociable, or boizu? The text defines boizu as being entirely inward-facing. It is not an attack on anyone, it's simply a state of emotional neutrality.
Right.
The unsociable person isn't angry. They aren't brooding. They are simply self-contained. They feel absolutely no need to flatter the people around them. But crucially, they also aren't demanding that anyone fix their mood.
And the environmental impact of these two states is drastically different. A moody person creates immense atmospheric tension. Trapped in a room with a moody person, everyone else is forced to deploy fake smiles just to survive the environment and placate the broadcaster.
Yeah.
But an unsociable person creates zero pressure. Because they aren't projecting demands or requiring a performance from others, the relationships around them can actually become much lighter and more natural.
Okay, wait. Isn't being unsmiling in a professional setting a liability? Like, I'm struggling with the real-world application of this. Let's say I am in a high-stakes professional setting, a negotiation or a tense board meeting. If I just sit there radiating neutrality while my boss or a client is stressed, aren't I going to be labeled as cold or not a team player? People might misinterpret your neutrality as hostility.
Well, the source material addresses this exact fear by focusing on the energy dynamics at play. It is true that some people might initially misread your neutrality, but failing to understand the distinction between manipulation and neutrality causes people to cling to incredibly toxic relationships out of that exact misplaced fear of seeming cold.
So we overcompensate with fake smiles because we are terrified of being perceived as the fukigen broadcaster.
Exactly. We exhaust ourselves trying to prove we aren't the toxic one.
All right.
But keeping your emotions contained internally, being boizu, is a highly efficient, low-energy way to live.
Right.
The text points out that the people who demand a constant, high-energy, fake-smiling performance from you just to feel comfortable in your presence are the exact people who will eventually drain your resources dry.
Yeah.
Neutrality acts as a filter. Yes, it might turn off people who require constant validation, but that is the intended feature, not a bug. It protects your energy reserves.
Okay, but recognizing the bad mood and understanding the value of neutrality is really only half the battle. If I'm sitting in a meeting with a broadcaster or engaging with a toxic client, how do I objectively identify who gets my genuine warm energy and who gets my unsociable boundary? We need a methodology.
The text provides a diagnostic tool for this that
Yeah.
completely bypasses intellectual analysis.
Mm.
It turns the fake smile itself into a sensor.
Here's where it gets really interesting because we are so accustomed to trying to lodging our way through social dynamics.
Right?
We analyze text messages, we dissect tone, we try to rationalize why someone is treating us poorly.
Right, we overthink it.
Yeah, but the source argues we should stop analyzing and start trusting the physical reflex. The bodily act of fake smiling is your ultimate alarm system.
If you are interacting with someone and you feel that immediate involuntary physical reflex to smile at them, specifically out of fear, the fear of them being displeased, the fear of their reaction, the fear of their unpredictable mood, that physical sensation is the exact undeniable indicator that this is a dose and you need to distance yourself from. Your body is recognizing a threat that your conscious mind is desperately trying to rationalize away.
The fatigue is the data. You feel that drop in your stomach, followed by the involuntary raising of your cheekbones, and you walk away from the conversation feeling physically depleted.
Yeah.
The text gets very specific about who these toxic targets typically are. It identifies people who invalidate your natural negative emotions. Like, for example, if you're expressing genuine sadness or frustration, and the other person shows visible disgust, impatience, or tries to immediately shut it down, they are denying your reality.
Right, and the diagnostic also includes people who place excessive expectations on you, pushing you beyond your stated capacity, and of course those who use their own bad moods as a weapon.
Yeah.
If the emotional performance required to simply exist in the same room as someone drains you, you do not need to intellectually justify setting a boundary. The physiological exhaustion is all the proof required.
Which brings us to a highly strategic tactic the source offers for managing this dynamic from the very beginning. It focuses on first impressions. Culturally, we are universally taught to put our best, brightest, most smiling face forward when we meet someone new.
Right, always smile.
Yeah, but the source material argues for the exact opposite approach. It suggests intentionally withholding a smile upon a first meeting.
Think of it in terms of economics. If you go into a new dynamic performing at a 10 out of 10 on the enthusiasm and fake smiling scale, you have artificially inflated the baseline currency of your personality.
You've set an unsustainably high exchange rate. Now, just to break even in that relationship, you have to spend massive amounts of energy. The moment your performance drops to a 7, the other person registers it as a deficit. They think you are angry with them.
Exactly. By intentionally withholding that initial fake smile, you set a baseline of neutrality. You prevent that excessive expectation from ever forming. You're establishing from minute one that your emotional energy is not available for public consumption. Furthermore, this acts as an immediate filter for the people entering your life.
Because the people who are only drawn to you when you are actively flattering them, or the people who lack the depth to judge your character beyond surface-level tearfulness, will naturally filter themselves out.
Right.
They are looking for someone to use. They are scanning for compliance. Your neutrality signals to them that you are not a viable target.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this methodology completely rewires the modern approach to human relationship building. We are culturally conditioned to gather a high volume of connections by attempting to be universally likable.
Right.
This framework suggests optimizing for the exact opposite outcome. You are not trying to be liked by everyone. You are optimizing for a highly curated, smaller circle of relationships where absolutely zero emotional performance is required.
So we've mapped out the external dynamics. We know how the reversal effect works. We know how to spot the threats using the physical sensor. And we understand the economic value of setting a neutral direct line. But we have to look inward now. What happens to the emotions that the fake smile is designed to pave over in the first place?
This is where the source material transitions from behavioral strategy into the deep mechanics of psychological healing. Beneath the chronic fake smile, the text argues, There's a foundation of deeply repressed sadness.
Let's sit with that for a second. It traces back to that childhood programming we discussed. This intense repression frequently occurs in individuals who were explicitly or implicitly forbidden from crying as children.
Yeah.
Their sadness was treated as an inconvenience to the volatile parent. It might have even been a punishable offense. The child learned to swallow the grief and paste a smile over the top to survive.
And the author makes a physiological comparison here that highlights the damage of this repression.
No.
They compare holding back natural sadness to physically holding in the need to use the bathroom.
Wow.
It sounds crude initially, but biologically, you are fighting an involuntary expulsion process.
The body needs to release something, and you are overriding the system to keep it contained. When you hold in that level of psychological pressure for decades, it doesn't just vanish, it distorts.
Right, the immense internal pressure created by that unexpressed sadness causes the system to malfunction. It leaks out in the form of even more compulsive fake smiling.
Yeah.
The smile is essentially a pressure valve that is broken. The individual smiles more frantically, the more internal pain they are trying to contain.
And the protocol for healing this is not what pop psychology often suggests. It is not about having a theatrical, violent, emotional outburst. It is a quiet, highly deliberate process.
It begins entirely internally, with self-acknowledgement. You must first admit to yourself that you are sad. You don't try to fix it. You don't try to smile through it or silver line it.
Right.
You simply sit with the biological reality of the sadness. Once that internal acknowledgement is solid, you move to the critical external step. You slowly articulate that sadness to one trusted person.
It's just one. You do not need to broadcast your trauma. You need one safe harbor where the performance can drop entirely. The text emphasizes that only when this deeply repressed sadness is safely released, validated by one secure base, and processed, can the pressure valve reset. Only then can a genuine, non-performative smile emerge.
It completely inverts what we are taught makes a person appealing.
Right.
We operate under the delusion that we must be forcefully, relentlessly cheerful to be charming. The profound shift in perspective here is that true magnetism actually stems from deep self-acceptance.
Right.
It is the willingness to be visibly sad when you are sad and visibly neutral when you are neutral. That authenticity is what draws secure people toward you.
Synthesizing the clinical journey we just took, the ultimate takeaway is that adopting an unsociable stance is not a rejection of humanity. It is a vital reallocation of your finite emotional energy.
Yeah.
It is the conscious decision to halt the agonizing self-sacrifice of trying to be liked by people who fundamentally dislike you or who only value you for your compliance.
You are stopping the leakage of your social capital. You redirect all of that saved energy toward the very few people who allow you to exist without a performance.
Let's do a rapid recap of the mechanics we've covered, because it challenges deeply held social programming. We identified the fake smile not as an act of politeness, but as an obsolete childhood survival tactic that actively invites exploitation via the reversal effect. We drew a strict boundary between emotional manipulation, the fucogen broadcaster, and healthy emotional self-containment, which is the Boiseau state of being neutral.
Right.
We established the fake smile as a physical sensor for toxic dynamics. And finally, we looked at the biological necessity of processing repressed sadness to repair the malfunctioning pressure valve.
It requires a complete recalibration of how we measure the success of an interaction. The goal is no longer universal approval. The goal is energy preservation.
I want to challenge everyone listening to audit their own interactions over the next 24 hours. Pay clinical attention to your physical reflexes. Notice the fatigue. Who are you smiling at purely out of fear? Where are you artificially inflating your emotional currency? And where can you afford to drop the performance and just be comfortably, neutrally unsociable?
This raises an important analytical question to leave you with. If our fake smiles are essentially outdated emotional armor, forged in a childhood environment that no longer exists, what other protective behaviors are we acting out today that are secretly broadcasting our vulnerabilities to the exact wrong people?
It forces a thorough reassessment of your entire defensive strategy. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is put on the armor, especially when the armor itself is what draws the fire. We will leave you with that to process. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.